right, welcome back everybody to episode 67 of the Unchained Vodcast. We have our full crew here, Kriss and Brand and myself. And today we're going to kind of continue what we started talking about 2 episodes ago, which was our State of the Game episode, where we just kind of said, all right, here's where the game is, here's what's developed, what's coming out soon, and what you can look forward to in the near future. And we're going to continue with that with a list of what we don't know. Just many things that they have either given us some information on, but we haven't really gotten clear information or detailed information, as well as things that haven't been talked about in like 3 years. So
almost where the game isn't.
Yeah. What things don't we know? And we're going to kind of, in context of that, maybe talk about, for some of them, why we don't know. Because for some of these things, there are reasons why we don't know or why they're not talking about them. And then going to kind of talk about what things towards the end, we'll kind of talk about what things we feel like we really ought to know, or they should be communicating more, or we would like them to communicate more. So we're going to talk about features of the game, gameplay. The lines between those two of those might blur a little bit, and kind of round off with environment. So let us start off with just gameplay features that we do not presently know about. And I already saw that someone mentioned one of the big ones. I know Sacrix has already started listing a ton of stuff.
Of course.
But I did see his comment about resurrection, and I think that's a good place to start with, because that's just the easy, low-hanging fruit. That obviously they have said almost nothing about resurrection. They've given us kind of
they said nothing.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they've kind of really given almost at least in my perspective, almost the idea that they don't even know what they want to do with resurrection, because they don't want to talk about or really plan for it until they see how the actual game's combat works, which I have to say, I mean, we were able to spend an hour and a half doing a whole episode just BSing about it, and really all we could come up with were about 2 or 3 possibilities. So the idea that they don't have even some recommendations of what they would think they would like to have seems kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not going to quote them. It wasn't that long ago that it came up when it was said, but along the lines, I believe it was Mark Jacobs said that they have a couple ideas floating around, but nothing concrete.
Yeah.
That's not word for word, but that's about
almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they at least have, we'll say, at least the reasoning that, they want to see how the combat goes before they really know how resurrection works in the game, or how they need it to work, is sensible. I think the problem is, and this is going to be a kind of a reoccurring theme of, there are occasions where I feel like they have to have an idea of what they think they would like to see, and I don't know why they don't communicate some of those things. Like, this isn't what we're saying we're going to do, but we're thinking it might look like that. Thoughts, and they kind of used to do that stuff more and post, way back in the day, back when most of this stuff was foundational, and they'd post things on the forums and go, "This is what we're thinking for this," comments and thoughts, and it does seem like we don't really. There's still a lot of things we haven't really had that kind of discussions or perspective insight into yet. There's so much stuff in that list that, so I'm
Sacrix to post everything.
Yeah, we can't talk about everything all at the same time, but chat, of course, feel free to suggest some things. I'm going to start looking at his list, and if y'all have one feature-wise that you want to bring up that we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Feature-wise, I think the biggest one that goes in line with combat is the air system isn't in, and it has at one point been in very briefly and very minimally, but once we got through that phase, and this was very, very early alpha, it hasn't made an appearance yet, and it's at the moment seemingly tied with parts of Character 2.0 and parts of the VFX 2.0 in that whole system, but no idea when it's going to get added in or where it is in development with everything else going on.
For me, well, there's two, but they're kind of tied in. It's the ears system and crafters in general, crafters themselves, because we heard about the crafting, but we've heard nothing about crafters in a very long time.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, again, features and gameplay are getting kind of blurred, and that
Yes.
it is kind of a trait of both. And seeing the crafter class abilities, or at least like we've seen for many other things, a mock-up of what those look like would be nice. Because it's been years since we got kind of the conceptual class abilities for the other classes, and we still don't have one for crafters. And that does seem very odd. It just seems like a big gaping hole in what we do know about how the game works.
Yeah, especially crafting is supposed to be one of the two pillars of CU. So having crafting down is very important. But having a crafter class, that's why when we made the episode on what needed to be added into as soon as possible into the betas, for me, crafters are a very important element, because right now we don't know anything about it. We don't know if it's going to be fun to play. If we don't know if the crafting is good, that's a good point. But then the class itself, needs to be good also.
The crafting is not ability tied, really. I mean, that's the Vox. I mean, maybe there are abilities that will affect the Vox. I don't know, but they are still supposed to have. They're not combat focused, but they are still supposed to have, I assume, some abilities that they can use out in the field, even if they are kind of sucky.
They're supposed to help a lot for sieges.
Yeah, and they've talked about things like making traps and placing those, and
being even. It was floating around. It was never confirmed, but having a work of what we call sapper, so really damaging the walls themselves, and it's so far we know nothing. They kind of talked about how the crafter class is gonna have a pool of points to distribute among different skills, so they can't be specialized in everything. They could go into being more generic mastering of basis of all things, or being very specialized in crap and other things. But we don't know. We don't know, because they talked about that in very vague concepts. It's not even in the crafting doc.
Yeah, and Svarty brings up a good point of, they've talked sometimes about their work they're doing on various classes, like talk about all the stuff they've done with mages and getting mages ready. And when they talk about getting concepts for those classes done, but then we never see anything of the product of that. So we can only assume we're not going to see it until it actually gets into the test. And it does kind of, I mean, I know it would be some additional work to put some of that stuff into a document that is public releasable, but that is kind of what most game developers seem to do. And CU has generally been much more communicative, and they are much more communicative about certain things. But it has, over the years, gotten to where it feels like some aspects of the game, of the features of the game, it's almost get less marketed and less pushed out to everybody so that we can see them.
I do think a number of the things that are on anyone's list of what's missing are directly tied into where the current state of testing is. In that, when you understand it and accept that testing is where it's at now, everything else kind of makes sense on why it's not necessarily getting focused and why we haven't heard more about it, but we still should be hearing some more stuff about it.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Just because something's not in testing, though, doesn't mean we shouldn't have a general idea of what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah. Just because it's not in testing doesn't mean they're not working on it.
Like, this game has been in development now for... 5-6 years? 6 years. And we still don't have a definitive race list. Just saying, that's kind of bad.
We just got a new one.
Yeah, they just added a new one. We shouldn't really be adding races to the list of official races at this point.
It's not even an official race. It's a potential race.
And I understand, like, them having things like that might get added in unexpectedly, but you can always add things later to the list.
Yeah.
But we still have things that, we know nothing about. Like, we know nothing about the Sturm. I'm gonna keep reiterating that. We know literally nothing about them except that they have butt wings. We have some concept art and models from ages ago, and outside of that, there's nothing. There's other races that we don't really have.
Most of the races we don't know about.
It's honestly. Just... I understand that. I would criticize some other games and say that perhaps they release information about classes and races that is perhaps a little too premature and misleading sometimes. But I do think there is a balance between telling us what's intended and what will be out, and not necessarily going into so much detail that they then have to backtrack later and go, okay, well, we didn't say that. And some developers sometimes do. But they put the stuff out like really early and go, we're going to have these races, these classes. That's like a basic just marketing at the beginning of an MMO development when you start pushing it out. And so that is kind of a case in point of like, why don't we just have the basic race list of all of them with the basic information of them? Like, I get that the Sturm are tied to, the impression I've always gotten is that like the Sturm are tied to some of the dragon lore, and they want to keep that hush-hush for the moment, which, by the way, another thing we don't know about dragons. What do those do in the game? And while I get that, I'm like...
That I suspect we'll know nothing about until way into launch.
And I'm like, while I get that, okay, sure, fair. You don't want to put out a becoming story for the Sturm. At least give me like a one-paragraph synopsis that goes into a little bit about, about them as opposed to just... But we really don't have... there's just, there's a lot of imbalances, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at in terms of what we do know about and what we don't know about. Whereas when you compare it to another game's development and launch and release and development process, I would go, I feel like for other games, I usually know this stuff. And then for this, I feel like I don't.
Yeah. We may not know like all the races and have not seen most of them in testing or in a playable environment where you can walk around in them, but I do know that they have models for basically all of the current known races built and maybe not quite tied into their animation system yet, but built.
Yeah.
Well, the moment they finish Character 2.0, hopefully that means they can start working on the other races, because aside from some slight variations, most of the other races in all realms can use the same base skeleton as the humans that they use for the testing. Aside from the being
they've specifically gone and created individual and unique skeletons for the bigger, larger races and the smaller races, so that the animation for them can be more tailored to their structure.
But that means it's still easier to iterate after that's been done.
Correct.
Like, say, the base skeleton for a human, a Kaichi, a Hamadryad, they're all the same size. I suspect they did skeletons per size. So the smaller races, medium races, and giant races. So once you have a basic skeleton, aside from the Binshid and probably the Sturm that have some added stuff with the butt wings and the floating head, that's the only big difference for those. The rest is, for me, at least, I'm not a dev, so I'm not 100% sure, but it seems that the base itself can be tailored to the different races after that.
Now, another major thing that we don't know much about, which I believe Sacrix mentioned earlier, is the air system. We've always, since the beginning of Kickstarter and everything, had a base idea of how air is supposed to work. And my problem with it is more that they always give us the exact same examples of how air works. We never really get like, we tried to talk about it once in an episode a long time ago when we were like, so once you get outside of the basic idea of fire and air and water and maybe stone, what else happens? Like, what does darkness magic do to things? What is, what happens with this? And they've given us no good examples of what happens when some of these other weirder elements and effects interact. And so, since they're making the ability builder, I assume that before making that, they have to have some idea of what all those interactions look like. For air, I mean, I would assume that would be important to know before making the ability builder, because otherwise, how do you know you're not going to make it and then go, oh shit, we can't do any of that? Which, I mean, they already did once. But, so maybe I shouldn't assume that they do know how all that is supposed to work. But I assume that they've kind of at least tentatively planned out concepts for that. And, we don't know what that looks like. And that's another thing that it just would be nice to know, like, if I cast some kind of weird shadow magic spell at a firewall, does it do anything?
Yeah, and that's part of like what we're talking about, where they design finalized first passes of a class, because they've been doing that for the last couple of months. Like in behind the scenes, we'll hear that Ben worked on the Devout this week, and the next week he's now started on something else. And to know that information or some of it, and to know if Ben is considering any of this while he's coming up with those abilities would be nice to know. We do know for Air that they have conceptually created the visual feel of what each of these elements are supposed to look like. Yeah. But that's all we've seen.
Yeah, and Strike said that he doesn't think that all magic will have effect with all other magic, and I actually don't think they necessarily should. I don't think everything necessarily does need to interact with air, but some of these things are already being used by other games. For instance, I got into the spell break testing for, I guess they're in alpha now, but that's basically it's basically a fantasy. What's the game called?
BR.
Huh?
BR.
Yeah, Battle Royale game. It's a fantasy Battle Royale game where you play as a mage, and some of the abilities interact via a very air-like system. So, like, if you shoot a poison cloud, you can shoot it with ice and freeze it into a giant poison block. Or you can shoot it with fire, and it turns into, like, a flaming poison thing. You can have a firewall and shoot it with ice, and it, like, turns into mist and just kind of cools off and stuff. So there's already starting to be games that are starting to use some of these concepts, which is kind of inevitable because that was like 6 years ago when we first learned of the idea.
I don't know if they would suck up the market because they're very different types of games.
Yeah, it's very different. I'm not saying they compete, but...
I agree with Sparty. I'd rather have no air than a half-assed air. And they're still heavily working on the physics. Part of, again, a lot of these is tied to things they're currently testing. Building destruction is part of air. It has to interact with the world. Yeah. And it has to be able to hit things and deal damage to things, and if possible, explode things if it's fire-based, maybe. And so the things they're testing now really are the stepping stones. Granted, it's taking a long time to build these stepping stones for some of these things that we really want to see.
Yeah. I can agree that I don't want a half-assed air, but I think that there might be disagreement on what is a half-assed air as well, because like I said, I don't think that necessarily every element needs to have a effect with every other element. Maybe by default, if a shadow bolt hits a fireball, they just explode. Just because it'd be like, these don't intermix, they don't do anything, they struck each other, so they blow up. But maybe half of the things do, as long as what I want is logic. I want there to I want it to make sense, that when I see these two things interact in some fashion, I go, okay, that kind of makes sense. I can see what they're doing there. As long as it makes sense, I don't necessarily think everything has to have some kind of specific or crazy reaction. But I would like to know what they're thinking about.
Something with Void shouldn't work because Void will cancel out everything. So
it's being a little literal.
Well, no, it's trying not to overcomplicate.
Yeah. Make it
because
logical, make
that-
it
they
reasonable
are
and simple.
doing that. They've been guilty of doing that regularly, overcomplicating things that they then need to simplify because it's taking too much time.
But also
Too
making
much-
sure that
too many people.
the system has logic to it will also help people to understand how to use it. So if they come in and go, oh, this does something, why does it do that? Then they're going to have a harder time remembering that it does that thing. Then if they're just like, okay, if I hit fireball with fireball, it makes a giant explosion. That makes sense. Okay, I can see that. What's going to happen if I shoot a ball of water, a stream of water into a wall of fire? It's probably going to cancel each other out. Oh, look, it does.
Yeah. One of the things we do know, at least about air and what it's intended to be, is that not all factions, or rather, each faction will have its own list of elements that they are kind of better in, and some factions won't have certain elements. Period, as a source of their magic in any of their classes.
Yeah. So I just think, air's not really something we don't know how it works as much. We don't have as much detail as I think would be nice and satisfying to the community. Banes and boons are kind of a similar thing where we do have some examples of how they work. And there's more examples, I think, I would say, in testing than there are on the website. But it's also a case of where we only really have like very basic examples of how it works. We don't have a lot of examples of exactly what you can do with that.
We have the examples of the old pre-alpha and alpha testing.
Yeah. A lot of them are really old, really rough concepts. And I will actually say I think to some degree it's reasonable because we don't really need Banes and Boons right now for the most part, except maybe basic ones for testing.
There's something on that note that I just remembered as well that kind of follows in the same line of, and this is something we don't know anything about, and if they're still doing it, still not, and that is the divine intervention and the death curses.
Yes,
that's
Each
true.
class is supposed to have some miraculous ability that is super potent.
I assume that's still the intention.
Yeah, and then when they die, some sort of death curse that kills something, again, super potent and weird. Never seen anything about those except for when they talked about the classes the very first time they introduced them.
Yeah. Now, I will say, to be fair, I do think there are some things where, like, they told us that. They said that's the case. I don't know that it's fair to say we don't know about it because they did tell us that, and they haven't rescinded it. Just like, they've said the depths are a thing, and we're going to talk about the depths. But they've said the depths are a thing. Is it fair to say that the depths are not going to be in game just because they haven't talked about it in a long time? I don't know. I don't feel like that's entirely fair because obviously there's other priorities.
No, and it's fair that we don't have to know everything right now. There's some things that it's reasonable to say it's okay we do not know it right now. But there are other things that we should at least have a basic understanding or explanation of it, or a basic concept of, even if they change the concept since last time they talked about it, at least knowing how they changing it. Like the health bars. The body parts being simplified.
Speaking of things we don't know, is the body parts UI and health system going to actually make it in game? Are they rethinking it? We don't,
The healer vision.
Yeah, and healer vision that hasn't been mentioned in a while. Still haven't really seen much communication about that. I do. That's another example though where I do feel like we know what the intention is. We know that they intend on having the body parts in. Now that may change at some point. They may even be reconsidering it now. I don't know. But they've told us that that's the intention, and I think that's fair because we know what they're trying to get to test it.
Yeah.
And the game's not at that point yet or not fully at that point yet to completely test it and say one way or the other. At least I assume not.
gone through a lot of visual changes too. Just the UI itself, the way the health bars look, your blood pool and stamina.
Mm-hmm. Now, another thing that relates to game features, I will say that the UI is still under iteration, and it, in a way that does confuse me sometimes, because a lot of things were delayed by Ability Builder. So, and I've said this before, a lot of things were delayed by Ability Builder, so I expected that art would be kind of ahead of where they need to be, and that tends to. So I would expect that UI would have already been kind of designed, even if it's not in game, but conceptually done. So that does confuse me, but that's not something we don't necessarily know about per se. It's just something that seems to be behind somehow. But something that we really don't know about that bothers me for game features is character customization. We know that we know roughly what body slots they intend to have, but but I'm not talking about gear. I'm talking about character building and customization of your physical appearance. Can we pick hair? I mean, we have no idea.
I suspect we won't know anything, at least until Beta 3.
And that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. What game, MMO, has come out in the last 10 years that we have not known, had an idea this far in what character customization and character building look like?
They show up.
It's usually one of the first things they throw up in a promo and go, look at this, we can do this, and we go, blah, 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 blah. And so it kind of, it frustrates me a little bit, because I'm like, the reason it frustrates me is because, one, that is kind of an important thing for me, MMO-wise, and two, if they haven't really talked about it much or shown anything at this point, it leaves me just assuming there will be no character customization, and we will have blank template characters that we can pick from, and that's it.
I want to say I saw within the last month a concept art of different types of like Viking hair. I think they
have shown
some choices.
They did slip in like a little image of some hair designs.
If I remember correctly, they said we wouldn't be able to customize the body types, because it would mean too much need for customization for the armors. You might have preset body types, like 2 or 3 body types, but that would be about it. There won't be a slider like the boob slider, the ass slider.
I don't care about sliders, honestly. I mean, it's nice in an MMO.
I'd like to have. Yeah, especially if we have full body armor, like unlike most MMOs, I don't really care about the body type. I care about enough choice of face.
I don't want to look like look like half the people standing around me.
Face, hair.
The old school WoW model is insufficient. Is what I'm saying.
we won't have a fully fledged customization anyway. They already said it, to be able to have the amount of people they want to be able to field in one battle. They already said they're gonna have to sacrifice some of the character customization to achieve it. Like I think aside from your race type, I think there won't be, it's part of the body type, there won't be a difference in heights also. So humans are all going to be the same height. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah. I would like, I know that it's not likely to be in the game, but I would enjoy like something like a height slider that doesn't necessarily impact massively, but does alter your height a little bit. And for body changes, because that seems like the sort of thing that should be able to adjust with just scaling of armor or something. But again,
probably.
I don't know how that works, but
limited level customization.
But like you said, I'm very much in the same book of where I at least want to be able to pick character hair from more than 6 options. Character eyes and general face appearance and stuff from more than just 5 or 6 options. I mean, just as a reminder, WoW came out. like 15 years ago.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We have progressed past that technology.
Slightly.
I think I said this in the where we're at episode that we don't see a lot of the art stuff that gets put out every week. We see the top, top 10, your weekly 10, and then a couple of really awesome pictures. Usually, I know they have a whole plethora of folders and things that are already done.
They ought to.
Waiting to just be put into the game. They really do. And we don't see that, so we take that for granted sometimes. But they have a lot of assets made and ready to be used, and there will be a dump at some point where we just see this huge insertion of all these assets.
That is kind of the point of the episode. They have a huge stockpile of this stuff, and we don't ever see most of it. So we don't know what they do have, what they don't have, where they are with art design and things of that nature.
It's just, I don't know. The character customization part, I can understand since they're retooling the characters with Characters 2.0. But once that's done, we hopefully will get a lot more details on the character customization, the visual customization.
The visual customization. And like I said, I don't expect amazing degrees of customization. I just hope for better than an MMO that came out 15 years ago. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, another thing we don't know about, if it's even still in the books, aging.
I don't remember aging.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember that being a thing.
I never remembered that being a thing.
It was. They talked about your character visually, as your character levels and you play it longer. They would have like the taller races growing taller, or some visual changes to your face and things like that. No, they talked about it. I distinctly remember.
Well, that
I didn't think either.
There's a case of things we don't know, because if that's the case, they haven't talked about that in so long that the rest of us have forgotten.
Oh yeah. They haven't talked about it in forever, in years.
Sacrix, we go on about how our character looks because we do give a shit about it and consider it to be something that matters, even if you don't. And there's a lot of other people who do.
It's important for RP.
Now, Sacrix did bring up something else when we were kind of talking about the UI and issues related to that, and that is the ears system. Speaking of things that we know almost nothing about. And now, admittedly, ears is not really that important in this current stage of testing.
Yeah.
But I assume they've got to have more art about it or something at least. I don't know. And it's... Again, it's just what is
the ear system?
What?
Yeah, what is the ear system? Because we know the concept of it.
They've put out some concept art at some point.
And that's it.
A long time ago.
I can't even tell you what the acronym stands for anymore.
Engraving.
Engraving adaptive rune system.
Reaction
rune system, something like that.
I can't remember.
That's how long it's been since we heard anything about
it.
Yeah. And I don't want to necessarily give the impression that I feel like they should just give us updates on tons of things all the time, like just to re-up us and go, by the way, we're working on all these things still. But when it's been like 2 years since we've heard about something, maybe just a recap going like, by the way, we have still been working on that thing. Here's some art for it or something. Just saying. Occasionally, just so we go, oh, that's still a thing. Okay, cool.
Yeah. The intention for it was for you to not have to look at a UI to see someone casting a spell or doing something. There's a visual element to seeing an enemy perform an action, and you can react to that, seeing what that visual is.
Yeah, and that kind of comes to the thing where, we've talked about the UI seeming to be kind of far behind in development and stuff. And so if they're still working on the UI, how likely is it that we're going to see a very interactive or interesting ear system? I don't know. I don't know. We've always been kind of like, how is that going to work, and how is that going to work out anyway with regards to that? So we'll have to see. Does anybody else have anything for game features before I move on to gameplay, which we've already talked about some things from, but
no,
not really on the features part.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered it pretty heavily.
Clarifying, ears is more of an engraving aspect of armor,
it is.
and not the visual element that I just mentioned. That would be the floating runes.
I thought ears was part of the floating runes concept.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Yeah, the ears is it's a crafter again.
It's been so long I can't remember.
It was ears better be in the game because it was a stretch goal.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah, no, it's so apparently it was so for engraving armors and weapons to be aesthetic, but also to add special effects.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Weapons, and because you're gonna light up like a Christmas tree, basically.
Yeah. Well, it was so people could see the kind of the runes for the different effects for your resistances and things of that nature.
Yeah. So it tied into what they were saying about the not reading the UI. The ear system was so you could look at a character, and depending on what type of light he has on his armor, on his weapons, his resistance, his strong suits and things like that, without having to look at.
I have to say, in current testing, most of the time, I can hardly even tell who is an enemy, much less what color runes they've got going on their arm. I'm like, who is that? What are they? I don't know. They're too far away. It's I feel like that's got to be addressed way sooner. There were some actual features things that I forgot I wrote down here from chat earlier. Like one of the things is, details on how skills are unlocked in the game. Within the progression system, how do we unlock new skills? I mean, we have some general idea of the concepts, but we haven't seen much on the exact process of how that's going to work, and how, whether we just ding and you suddenly gain a new skill, or you pick a new skill, or, how that kind of morphs and evolves.
Yeah.
And the other one is, which Sacrix mentioned earlier, was building restrictions. Kind of rules for building, and exactly what those are going to look like for
where you can and can't build.
Yeah, I mean, they've touched on it a little bit and talked about some ideas for what we might have to do, but we don't really have like a concrete, this is how we're going to address that. We've done an episode speculating on it, but I feel like for many of these things, we could just look at all of our episodes where we've speculated about stuff, and we pretty much have a comprehensive list of all the stuff we don't know. So, moving on to gameplay. Svardy kind of already mentioned this, which is stealth classes. How the Veil is going to work now, because it's kind of changed a few times. So, how the Veil is going to work, is it even going to exist at launch? It seems increasingly doubtful.
Maybe someone in chat can answer if they've been more attentive than I have with updates. With Ben going from class to class behind the scenes, they announce it every week. Has he done stealth yet?
I don't remember seeing anything about it
in that list of things he's kind of jumped onto.
I don't remember him talking about stealth.
Yeah, I don't remember him talking about it, because stealth is an expander goal, not a stretch goal, but a
extender pack.
Extender pack, thank you. So it's not required for launch, and there was a period of time where it was hard to get a straight answer on the streams of whether or not stealth was included or intended for launch, and they finally they seemed at one point to suggest that it was intended, and then they seemed to suggest at another point that it probably
It
was
was
not
not.
going to be in at launch. I don't
Yeah.
know. So it still very much is a sort of kind of
'cause
thing.
I know he did work on the support class. He did work on the devout class. He did work on even spirit mages. And I thought we were going to be getting stealth before spirit mages. But he's already done first pass design for those. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe we can find an answer to that.
Mm.
But yeah, it'd be nice to know about stealth as a whole in the Veil and any of how that's going to work. I know I've asked Mark before if there'd be fighting in the Veil, and I've even had a chance to ask Ben, and he said the most extent of it would be a couple instances of the stealther classes being able to fight, but a lot of the abilities you use bring you out of the Veil.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily intended to be a battlefield area in and of itself.
Okay, correction. It was a stretch. Stealth was a stretch goal, but it was a stretch goal slated for after launch originally. So
Yeah.
it wasn't a launch stretch goal. But it wasn't an extender pack either. It was an initial stretch goal.
Yeah.
But at least according to the wiki page anyway, it says it was slated for post launch. And so it's never been a guarantee for launch, but for at least at some point in time, it was a very much like a strive to get that in launch thing. And now we're kind of, I don't know. But even if stealth doesn't go in game, what does that mean for Veil Storms? I don't know.
Veil Storms too.
We've already discussed resurrection and health systems. The other thing is siege and capturing mechanics.
Yeah, the capturing mechanics, at the moment, they're very basic.
Yeah. Well, and I assume the current capturing mechanics have nothing to do with what it's going to actually look like.
No.
They've said before it's kind of placeholder. But it's been placeholder for like 4 years. So.
Well,
yeah, and we're allowed to talk about some of the testing stuff now. We just can't show it. The current capturing mechanic is you stand in the square of effect. As long as you are the only person in there, you capture it after like 10 seconds. It's pretty standard, pretty straightforward. I did ask Mark about, this was a joke like 2 weeks ago, how long it would take to rebuild the 9 million block castle in game once the game was live. And he said it would take several days to get close, assuming you had all the materials for it, and it would take equal amount of time to destroy it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. We've got we do have some basic information on the concepts for that, where they've talked about, and we've done a whole episode speculating on what they've told us. But what they've told us could probably be summed up in a couple lines of it'll take a very long time to destroy something. It will take a very long time to capture it. And we know that maybe there might be some sort of a gating mechanism to capturing it. Will there be? We don't know. So because how they're going to address night capping, we don't know exactly. They've given a few ideas, which is more than we've gotten on some things. So we do know some things about how that might work, but it is still very much okay, if we're in beta, I feel like we should have a good idea of how capturing works. But of course, we've discussed whether or not we're in beta before. So I guess I can't simultaneously say we're not really in beta yet and then hold them to beta standard.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point considering one of the scenarios that we've at least been able to test in, which we're not doing currently, was a capture point based scenario. And, it ran mostly without the capture point element of it.
Mostly just a death match. I mean, you're pretty much just killing people and then going, oh, look, I captured it. You're capturing it for points. So we got see some of the point model of things like that. But that's just a purely scenario concept. That has nothing to do. That's just with the dragon circles and those like battle scenarios. That has nothing to do with RVR. Now, it might have to do with RVR with respect to like your progression and your daily report for progress and stuff. But Let's see. I was trying to catch up on chat a little bit here. Okay, Rebel. I have one final gameplay aspect that we don't really know about. Again, this is something we do know a little bit about their concepts and intention about, but we don't have a concrete idea of what it's going to look like in game, and that is travel. They have generally said that there won't be like mounts, most likely. There will most likely not be mounts. We haven't really seen like buffing and speed buffs, though. That's that'll be with the bards and stuff, and probably later stage of testing. But so far, all the testing and stuff, for the most part, has just had to do with either single islands or using kind of just quick transport, teleportation, and stuff as a temporary measure to get from island to island. We don't really know about exactly how caravans will look and function. We don't really know about what forms of, if any, there will be quick or quicker travel from island to island. Whether we're taking boats. I believe at one point they talked about us having boats to not quick travel, but quicker travel up to further up locations. Having more concrete idea of how that works would be good.
Yeah, because I think we'll talk about islands and environment part, but there has to be a way to get to the next island when it's not connected, assuming that all still is a thing.
Speaking of gameplay. And this is kind of an example also of, we follow the game very closely, because we have to talk about it on here. We try to follow it very closely. Most people don't follow it that closely, and regularly. And so after 2 or 3 or 4 years of not talking about something, it basically doesn't exist in the community anymore. Unless someone is regularly refreshing and telling people about it, what is that thing? It might as well not even exist as a concept, because most people aren't tuned in enough to even remember. And then for some of us that are, we go back and go like, what was ears again?
Yeah.
Because it just hasn't been addressed in so long that we kind of go, God, I don't remember. Strike just like ears. But as Bran mentioned, we do also have crap, I just forgot mid-sentence what I was going to say. Islands, thank you. Joining, which kind of brings us into gameplay versus environment, but how the islands come together, whether the server just reloads at the end of the day, or whether they actually drift as was the intention originally, how that even works.
Technically, I think the easiest and probably the route they would take, because it's the easiest way for them to, is during the daily reset.
That would be the easiest way, but then that's going to make a very non-dynamic method of pulling the islands together.
So if you cap it during the morning hours,
and
you
someone
have to
takes
wait till the end of the day for
it
to connect.
It would take a while for the islands to join.
Yeah.
You would need to hold them for a while for them to actually join together.
The other thing that I'm a little bit worried about might be the case, because this seems like it might be another easier way, not as easy, but easier way for them to do it, is that they just rule out the water areas and the ocean altogether. It basically does not exist. It's there, it's water, but you cannot swim in it or it kills you. That means there are no boats that actually go across it. There is no naval battle at any point in the future of the game. And instead, you see a visual representation of the island growing closer to you, and then at some point they connect and travel through it as basically instantaneous across a bridge or something. And they basically just kind of hack the travel between the two of them. As I recall, they have talked about the islands being like on their own separate servers, and them communicating for the attacks across and things like that. So it does seem like they could perhaps finagle that to basically just have a visual representation of water that we never interact with.
Yeah.
Which would kind of suck, honestly. It would kind of be...
I don't think that'll end up being the case. Because they do have like boats models already made for travel specifically.
Yeah.
I think it's even in the beta doc that one of the scenarios is like you're on a boat that takes you to the island, and
Yeah.
that has yet to be seen. But
yeah, it just. I mean, again, I'm obviously not a developer. I don't know how a lot of these things work, but it does seem like having an island that literally moves on the world and moves all the people on it while they're fighting, even though it's super slow. It does seem like that would cause some stress on servers, and it's not something that, as far as I can tell, they've been testing.
Yeah.
And server stress testing is something they've been really emphasizing. So
they did at one point test the ability to transition from one server to another running across like a bridge, and they got it down to a point where you really couldn't even tell that you were making that transition.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's part of the necessary tech to do that.
Yeah, well, I have no. I don't see an issue with that. I see the issue again is the island moving part of it.
Yeah.
Because
I'd like to know
it does seem like moving things causes stress on the server, and so if you're literally taking a whole island of people and moving them continually, 24/7,
yeah, that
might be a problem.
That's a lot of information exchange.
I'd like to know if the islands themselves are predetermined, like this island can only connect to this other island, or if they can kind of move around and the map is constantly actually changing. It's never the same when you connect them.
Well, didn't they say it was like layers? Like you couldn't go on the far side of the map and capture that island to go all the way to yours. I think they said something like that, and that you had to capture them progressively to get closer and closer to the other realms capital city.
Maybe. We have a concept art of like the different islands split in different degrees and connected, but that's just concept art.
Now there was I did think of another way they could cheat it, which was basically making land bridges just rise up between the islands instead of moving the islands.
That's what I was about to say. That's another way to...
Anyway, we're not really supposed to be here to speculate on how it would work. The point is, we don't know how it works.
Which is why we speculate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pulling us off base a little bit.
Slightly.
Let's see. Which kind of relates to another thing I wanted to talk about is we don't know what the final map's going to look like.
Yep.
We really
I
don't
think they know what the final map's going to look like.
I know, right? But they've got all this art you just mentioned that they have. So surely someone at some point has drawn a map of the world by this point.
Well,
why not? Why would they not have?
You don't know if it's going to be the right one.
Well, no, they've said. Well, they said when they released that was not the actual map of the world. They were like, this is just a concept for what it could look like. So, I mean, that's just art. I mean, surely there's strategic considerations for that, but you would think that by now someone would have just gone, all right, we figured this out.
As Spike said, capturing the island, how is it going to work?
Yeah, and they've been focusing their map efforts on scenarios specifically. The new Siege scenario is due to drop soon, which I don't think we've seen a map of what that's going to look like.
Tested, It's already been tested in IT and Alpha.
Yeah, not Alpha. Definitely IT. I don't think it's been on Alpha.
Yeah, I think just IT.
I don't think the actual, not the one we're currently testing with the 9 million block thing. I think it's a placeholder. but they're working on those kind of things, like on what's needed in the next 2 months versus what's needed by December 2019.
Yeah.
So. That's all I have, except for my final question. So, for what other things do we not know about, guys?
They were talking in chat about like bounties and
there's
something else along with that as well. I forgot. But yeah, that was the thing.
I was looking earlier for IDs at the stretch goals. The first stretch goal in the list is the Herald Armory.
I don't even remember what that is.
Like WoW's armory, basically. So an outside information page where you can see all your stats, your stuff. Like a mobile app, supposedly.
Yeah. And that's something they've got a lot of time to work on. But we haven't heard updates about it in a long time.
Yep. And then the other stretch goal was the emotes.
Yeah, which I imagine they're still iterating on the skeletons and the models and stuff. So I figure they've got to have that before they can outsource the emotes.
I'd like to know how the King rewards, realm rewards work.
The realm rewards, the realm
specifically honor. Like for different classes. We do know it's based off activity, but what specific activities can each class do that might be different than others to achieve?
And the difference between crafters and combatants getting realm rewards.
Yeah, Strike did. I do remember this happening. Strike mentioned that they talked about a web API that was set up that would work for that.
The goal was them supposed to do it.
Yeah,
not a third party, not a community created one.
Yeah, but I imagine they would need the web API themselves to do it anyway.
Yeah,
so there has at least been something done that would be necessary for that.
True.
But I think it's been a while since we got that update because I don't even remember when that was. I just vaguely have recollection of it coming out at some point.
That was a long time ago again.
Yeah. I mean, anything that's not in testing right now is basically an unknown. So
yes.
The list is a huge one.
Yeah, I mean they've like I said, if there's something that they've told us is gonna be in, and until they say otherwise, I generally assume that's still the case.
It's gonna be in.
But there are some things that as we go on that either people will just completely forget exist, or things come out that make us question that, like like the health system where we keep going in and we still haven't really fully tested that, and we start to wonder, okay, is that going to be a thing? Or we see updates on classes without any updates on stealth, and we wonder, okay, what's the status of that going to be? I don't know. Depths. There's the example I wanted. Depths. We go so long without any update on it, then we kind of start to go, okay, is that even still going to make launch?
The answer is probably no to that.
Probably not.
Yeah. And for that one, I would be okay with.
Yeah, I really want the depths in game, and I do really want it to be cool. But I want it to be cool when it comes in, and I don't want to delay the game for the depths. The depths is one of the few things I would not delay the game for. I'd be like, I'm okay with that being an expansion. That's fine, as long as I don't have to pay extra for it. I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
We've talked about a lot of things, and we've seen the building also, but we don't know how the building is going to work in game for the blueprints.
Yeah.
Will you be able to? Will you have to make the blueprint in game, or can you make the blueprint in Cube and then import it? Because they were talking about that at first, and then you can plug the blueprint and everybody can contribute.
No real concrete idea how that works, especially with multiple people.
Trevel, did you blueprint your 9 million block castle and then they just imported it into the?
Well, I mean, that's kind of how it works now in Cube anyway. So, So, my last question here is, I mean, a lot of this stuff, there's a lot of stuff we don't know about, or a lot of stuff we're confused about or no longer certain about. But ultimately, a lot of them do have reasons we don't know about them, like the health system and things of that nature. So, but the lack of knowledge in some cases has, I think, created a certain degree of animosity and at times, not necessarily perpetually, but just at times where people are upset over the amount of things that we don't know.
Yes.
So with that in mind, what things do you think should be prioritized as things that we should be told about and updated on?
I know I'm biased, but crafters would be a priority.
I agree. Crafter abilities for the class.
It's not even for me. They've marketed the game as having crafters being a meaningful class that is a base of the game. It should be at least mentioned and started to be worked on. And we should know more about the crafting class, not just the crafting itself, but the crafter class. how it's gonna work, because
is a major part of the game's marketing.
If we judge from our own roster of our guild, half of our guild is crafters. Or
moment,
people
yes.
It's pretty noticeable.
Yeah. Or people interested in crafting. And I suspect a lot of the backers and a lot of the community is part of that. If you judge by the discussions in the crafters forum, there's a big enthusiastic community interested and involved and who backs you for the crafting. You can't advertise it as such an important part of the game and not talked about it for years.
Yeah. I mean, it's the only
released a base of the class. They should have released, at least like the other classes, just a base of the class, the concept of it, so we know we have a rough idea of how it's going to work.
It's the only class that we don't have, like anything on, really.
Like literally nothing. I would be okay with a page like the other classes with roughly abilities, like 1 or 2 examples, a concept of how the class is going to work. That's it. I would be already okay with that as a base. Right now, nothing.
Yeah, I'm in the same realm, not just crafters, though, all class design mechanics. As Farty said the same thing. Basically, all class design info to know, especially when you're choosing a class that is a long-term build-up with a horizontal progression. It's kind of nice to know that info so you can make that choice and to really see the differences and start thinking about how they all work together.
No, especially since they've been putting out that they're kind of working on iterations of and finishing these concepts for the class designs, and now they're working on a new one and then another one, and we're like, okay, so what is that? I mean, I thought we already had those, so what is it now? For me, one of them is that I think it should be talked about is the concepts for siege capturing mechanics, getting more concrete ideas of how that's going to work in the game, because that's again another very core concept for the game. Just saying that it takes a long time to destroy a base and capture it is something. But again, the concept of night capping always comes in. And like I said, they gave us a little bit about it, saying that, well, there might be some form of gating. And I'm like, okay, well, I would like to know, what are you thinking the intention for that will be? Will it be X or Y? I mean, even if you give me a list of options, like it's going to be one of these 3 things, I think that's fair. Just a more concrete idea on how that works. And as somebody said, the same thing with building time. Just the whole idea of that. I don't necessarily need a defined number, but just putting out there, it'll take a couple days to build a castle that big. Okay.
If you have the materials to begin with.
Yeah, if you have the materials. And that's the thing. Like Strike just said, oh God, no time gates. But if they don't use time gates, how do they prevent night capping?
It's purely all in the damage numbers. I think it just takes a long time to destroy, literally.
But they've also talked about things like maybe having ladders and...
Yeah, but time gating has become a bad word in the MMO community. But what they apparently were saying in time gating is that taking a keep would take not a massive amount of time, but enough that night capping is still possible because it's part of the game, and I'm okay with that, but not as easy as it is in other games where you can do night capping.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want you don't want something that's going to stop people and make them sit and wait for hours. But at the same time, take one of the things that killed PlanetSide 2 for me was the fact that you would go and capture half the map in about 3 hours, and then you turn around, log off, come back later in the afternoon, and they had recaptured all of your work, and you're basically just swapping keeps back and forth. It was stupid. It was like, nothing matters anymore in the game. None of this matters at all.
There's definitely needs to be balance of time and fun, because with Siege, if it takes 8 hours to destroy a castle using a trebuchet, I'm not going to sit in a trebuchet for 8 hours. That's not fun. That's like trebuchet simulator at that point. You know, it's not Camelot Unchained.
Yeah, so. But we're supposed to be able to destroy keeps. So if once we capture a keep, can we just go, hey, destroy this keep? And then it takes like 3 days to destroy and just progressively get smaller? How does that work?
Supposedly,
I need to know.
Destroying a keep will take as long as to build it, or slightly less if you just destroy it, as long, if not longer, than to build it if you want to salvage the materials.
Destroying it's faster than building it. I know that. Mark said that because he doesn't want it where you can sit there behind a wall being destroyed and repair it faster than the damage being done.
Well, that they can just prevent you from actually building while it's in combat.
Yeah, and again, there's another thing that kind of goes in with some of this is the weekly wrap-ups are great. The weekly video wrap-ups and stuff, but those really should not be the primary method for getting information on this kind of stuff out. It should be on the web. It should be on the website, and I don't even mean in the newsletter and in the things I post. It should be on a tab on the website that lists and describes these things and exactly how they work for some of these core concepts that are important, because otherwise they're going to start promoting the game and people are going to come in and go, so how does all that work? Oh, just go review the last 3 years of video wrap-ups and you'll be fine. Or we'll just let the fans explain it all to you. That does not work. Another thing for me that I think really needs to be addressed and explained more are the examples of air, the air system, how it's going to work. Just a much more robust explanation and examples of how air is intended to work in the game and how it's going to be implemented. It is, I feel, it's not perhaps as core as Siege, but it is another, I feel, kind of core mechanic that the game was marketed on. And so if they don't have air in the game, or it's not very detailed or robust, I will be kind of upset. And so I can understand like the idea of maybe of not wanting people to necessarily copy their stuff, but we're way beyond that. I mean, the game's supposed to be coming out in a year plus. I think it's high time that we should have a very good understanding of exactly how that's supposed to work, beyond just the 3 or 4 examples we have.
In 8 months.
Yeah, we know that's not happening. So
no, we know that, but
yeah.
Supposed to.
I would say another thing for me is intended character visual customization options for appearance, not clothing and gear. I think that is cool and interesting, but we actually have some information on that. I will say they've given us some information on the layered clothing and stuff. So kudos for them to that. But facial appearance, whether we can adjust height, hair, I mean, I want to know what that's going to look like. And I feel like that should be a thing that's pretty easy to tell us about.
Then to prevent night capping, there could also be a progressive capping. Like the more complex your outpost or your keep is, the more points they need to capture before capturing the core of it. And then it swaps ownership.
Something.
So do either of you have any more things you feel should be priorities that they should tell us about?
No.
Because
I still have more. I'm just giving y'all a chance to throw some out before I just keep rambling on.
I have one priority, and that was the class thing.
Yeah, and I have one priority, and you guys know about it.
Oh, I think options for Resurrection, they've been super cagey about this for ages, and I think it's crap. I'll just go ahead and say it. I think it's crap. They should at least be able to give us a list of options they're considering and say, we're thinking of these 2 or 3 options for Resurrection. We would prefer to do this, but we're going to test it in combat and see how it works, and then see if this works.
That they have zero idea of what would work.
I know, that's one of the few things where it just feels like they're lying to us. Like, oh, we're not even considering that yet. I'm like, how can you not be considering that?
Because it's a touchy subject. They're avoiding it like the plague.
I know, and that does bother me because I'm like, we're this far along in the game. We should have some idea of what Resurrection's going to look like. It feels crazy that we don't. I can't say crafter class abilities because we already talked about that. It was in my list. And I think that's actually it for my list.
Night capping also, because there's still the argument going in the chat about night capping. Night capping is a problem when you have a limited amount of places to cap and no cooperation. Night capping, when there's not just one element that needs to be capped, and a full realm that has huge perks into defending any and all points of interest on your realm, will prevent night capping a lot more.
There's also
there won't be 15 servers on launch.
I have ideas on it, but it's completely irrelevant to this episode
the whole
topic.
community is going to be in 1 or 2 servers at launch, I suspect. 3 maximum. So
there's also the idea of a consequence, which Mark has talked about. If you lose your stuff, there are negative consequences to that. He hasn't said there's positive things that to benefit you if you take them per se, but the incentive is you don't want to let your stuff get taken over. So
there should be enough of a penalty for losing your keep to prevent keep swapping.
Yeah. Honestly, I will, since we're going to talk about it, even though it's not really the topic of this episode, I will go ahead.
Another one that we don't know about.
I will go ahead and say that server size is something else we don't entirely know about for sure, but that is very contingent, I think, on their stress testing and everything. So that's kind of reasonable. But when it comes to night capping and everything, I do feel like there is one way that they can very simply try to address it. It doesn't necessarily get rid of it as much as it de-incentivizes it, is by making it take a considerable amount of time to take a keep. Not ridiculous amount, but not hours and hours, but to making it take time consuming to take a keep, and then make it so that in the game's progression and rewards, if no one is fighting you over the keep, you get nothing for taking it.
Yeah.
That de-incentivizes the idea of going into a server in the middle of the night and taking people's keeps. Surely you can still do it to troll them, and they should have other ways to discourage that as well to some degree. But if there's absolutely nothing to gain from night capping it, then it's going to be. And I think especially if they were to do something where it's somewhat easier to recapture a keep after someone has taken it in that fashion, if no one's defending it, then it kind of again flips that whole concept where you can go, well, I mean, they got nothing for taking it, and we can pretty easily take it back because it's our keep. Yeah. So
because a keep is not repairing itself. You will need to repair the keep.
Exactly.
Once you take it. So if they attack right after you took it, the damage is already done, so it's easier to recap. And in the same idea, no reward for a keep that isn't defended, not necessarily, but enough of a low reward that it makes it not profitable to do it.
Yeah,
compared to what resources you expended to do it.
Yeah, and I agree with Skylar. There are many of these subjects where I do feel like they have to have a core idea of how they want to do it, even if they don't know that this is definitely how they're going to do it. And I do feel like they intentionally sometimes decide not to tell us that. And that's why I wanted to have this list of like, what are things that we feel like they haven't told us that they really should be. And, air, crafter class abilities, character visual customization, options for resurrection, or what their planned options to consider are, and the concepts for siege capture mechanics seem like very basic, core, fundamental things that the game we need to know about how they're going to work in the game. And if they are just kind of sitting on that because they don't want to put it out there before they test it, it seems like crap.
I mean, you would hope they know. Because the alternative is mind-boggling to think about.
That they've actually not considered it in 6 years is kind of would be upsetting.
Yeah.
So I don't get why that's
I
an
don't
acceptable
think
response.
most of them are veteran of the industry. That being said, to be honest, and I'll leave it at that, but the article about BioWare that I've read, the Jason Schreier article, made me reconsider a lot of what I thought was possible in game development studio. I don't think it applies to CSE because they've been transparent enough, and we've had contact enough with all the devs to know it's not happening, or at least not to that degree. But it makes me a lot more cautious in what I think is actually happening in studios nowadays.
And that's why I always kind of do hedge my comments on things like that, where I'm like, surely they must have thought about and actually planned out what they want to do with Resurrection, or I hope they have, because otherwise that's really bad.
Yes, absolutely.
So at any rate, I do think we've kind of gone through the full list. And so I do want to thank everybody for hanging out and throwing out things and helping us to remember things that we don't remember, because it has been a long road.
Like years.
We're at 67 episodes, not even counting the show we did before this one. So it's been a long time. And CSE is overall very communicative, and there are a lot of things that they tell us, but there are sometimes a lot of things that we don't know about, and sometimes I see those causing issues in the community, not to mention also issues for the show, because we need things to talk about. So I will leave it with that, and we will be back in 2 weeks for episode 68, and we'll see what we're going to talk about then. So until then, catch you around.
Later.